There are certain words that seem to crop up every time an election cycle rolls around. Persuadables, swing voters, and undecided. Then there's identity-related groups like Latino men, suburban moms, and the more vague working-class voter. What do you imagine when you hear working-class voter? Your image probably depends on where you grew up, or even where you're living now. But a common stereotype of a working-class voter is a white man in a factory town or a rural area. Are you maybe seeing a farmer, an auto worker, or a truck driver? Or do you imagine a more racially diverse group like cashiers, EMTs, or office workers living in urban areas? My friend Orlando falls into the latter category. He's a 40-year-old Latino gay man in New York City who works in an office. He jokingly refers to himself as a corporate schmo.
When I hear working class voters, I do think of myself, but being from an urban area, I tend to think of it more so that way. And so I think of Black and brown people. I think there's this idea that in other places, in suburban areas or rural areas more specifically, it looks very different than what it looks like in an urban area. And for me, there's almost this sort of concept that there really is no working class in those areas. It's either you're wealthy or you're poor.
What makes you or someone else working class?
Simply put, I work. And if I don't work, I can't really live a full life.
This is Shifting Terrain. I'm Rachel Rybacek, a working-class sociologist and organizer. I've spent a long time thinking about race and class, most recently in politics. As the child of an immigrant growing up working poor in a city, I saw disenfranchisement firsthand. In the years since, I've watched politicians and news media focus on the concerns of working-class people around elections, only to leave them behind until the next cycle. Simplistic stereotypes are the norm, and race and class are often used interchangeably. That won't be the case here. In this series, I'll speak with voters, political strategists, organizers, and politicians about how class and race play out in voting patterns, campaigns, the media, and ultimately, our path forward as a multiracial, cross-class democracy. In today's episode, we'll be talking about working-class voters, who they actually are and how they impact elections. We discuss how major presidential campaigns have abandoned them and why you should never play Trump's voice in a Democratic political ad. To start, we'll focus on polls, a tool that can help us understand, but can also distort, the reality of the voting public. And there's something that's spiking a lot of people's anxiety these days. Let's first hear how polls are playing out for Orlando, our New York City voter. So, how does news about polls, which seem to come out almost daily, affect your thinking about the election?
I try not to let it affect my thinking as much as I can. It's really hard because, this is just nonstop. It's an overload of information. So it's really an exercise in trying to clear my mind of a lot of that because a lot of it just comes in as noise. I have conversations with people where it's clear that they're being very affected by it. But some of it I do think is useful. I think it's just a good way to check the pulse, to see how people are reacting to things, to see if there's a change or a swing in the way that people are seeing certain issues. But ultimately, I don't think that it's anything to rely on.
I think a lot of us feel this way. So I brought in two experts to talk about it. I'm joined by Jordan Berg Powers, a consultant on organizing and messaging in politics who helped elect new leaders across the state of Massachusetts and trained hundreds of grassroots organizers as executive director of Mass Alliance. Hi, Jordan.
Hi.
And Mike Lux, who provides progressive political strategy as CEO of Mike Lux Media. Hi, Mike.
Hey.
Mike, you've spent many years analyzing polls. Talk about some of the categories that are used to make predictions or explain patterns among voters broadly.
Well, that very much depends on the pollster. Polling is not a pure science. There is a scientific element to it, but polling is based on the assumptions of the pollster and the attitudes of the pollster, and in some cases, the ideology of the pollster. If it's a poll about an upcoming election, they make assumptions about who's going to vote. And those assumptions are sometimes wildly wrong, Those assumptions sometimes don't measure grassroots activity or how good a field operation is or how good a GOTV operation is. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but
yeah, I just want to echo that. And one of the things I say to people is that polling is an art form as much as it is a science. And some pollsters actually do a good job of reflecting back our society, and some are more impressionistic in their artistry, and it bears little resemblance to the realities of what's going on. And there, for many reasons, maybe proficiency, maybe ideology, that happens. But some of the groupings that people do, usually some binary gender affiliations, people are sort of putting themselves in their own buckets in terms of ethnicity and race, and then usually some pretty broad distinctions on income, which is actually also usually poorly self-reported and isn't necessarily as good as wealth in figuring out where people actually are. And to Mike's point, a lot of times when they talk about income, somebody who's like makes, $50,000 and somebody makes $100,000 have widely, they're just wildly different lives, but they might get grouped together depending on sort of the picadillos of the person doing the polling.
I have a good friend who I think is one of the most brilliant data analysts in national politics, who has called our obsession with polling mad poll disease. His basic point is we're way too obsessed with polls. We're way too obsessed with every time a new number comes out that's a little bit different than the last number. Usually it doesn't mean a damn thing because it's, all polling, of course, is within the margin of error. But we get all worked up over, oh my God, we've shifted 4 points. We've shifted 3 points. And it's all, can I swear on this show? It's all bullshit, basically. So the first thing is there's a huge over-reliance on polls. And people set their mood by polls, which is crazy. I'll give you the ultimate example. In the 2016 race, I was working at the DNC in the final 2 months of the campaign. And the folks on the Clinton campaign kept telling us that their voter modeling meant that they were locked in to win. And they weren't worried about the fact that our field people out on the doors were saying, I think we're turning out the wrong people. Or we're saying, this person who you said was a for sure Hillary person is not a Hillary person. A lot of us who were actually doing the work at the doors in the field were like, there's something funky going on in this election, and we may not win this thing. And I think sometimes people fall in love with a poll that they follow so closely, or they fall in love with an analyst like the folks at 538. And a lot of it is just pure noise and bullshit.
Mike, we could not agree more. I like to bifurcate what polling is supposed to do and what we see on TV or in the newspaper. What we see is absolute junk. It is just nonsense. I tell people all the time, it has the illusion of nonpartisanship that the media likes to just obsess about without actually having anything real about it. A poll in one moment in time is as good as that moment in time. Polling is something that has the illusion of like, listen, I'm just giving you a fact without it actually being factual. If you're doing a poll correctly, it's telling you a story about the electorate that you want to learn, to better target the work that you're doing, to better understand how you can chart a path towards victory. But it is not a shortcut for the actual work to get you to that victory. And that's a mistake that I think not just the Clinton campaign for sure made, but a lot of campaigns, which is data is destiny. And that is just not the case.
Something that I've noticed in particular in the media and messaging from campaigns is often an emphasis placed on certain groups who will determine the outcome of an election. And it seems that that's one of the ways polls are being used. And some of these categories, we have things like suburban moms, Black women, Latino men, working class voters. But that last category in particular is often vague and used to refer to many different groups of people without explicitly naming more details about the working class voter. Mike, you've written about working class voters, and so I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you define working class voters and what criteria put someone in that group.
Working class voters is a way overbroad category. Working class includes 2/3 of the electorate. 2/3 of the electorate is so big that it's like asking, well, what do women think? There's lots of different kinds of women. They think lots of different kinds of things. A lot of the classic political wisdom was, okay, cities are where Democrats live, rural areas are where Republicans live, and suburbs are where the swing voters live. And besides being incredibly overdrawn and simplistic, I was very aware that there were more kinds of communities than that, like Flint, Michigan, or Scranton, Pennsylvania. Those are very different communities from the very rural small towns that are dominated by the farm economy. Some of them are more tourist-oriented. Some of them are dominated by colleges. What we've tried to do in our research is to really hone in on a certain category of working class voters, which are folks who live in smaller towns and medium-sized towns, the folks who are in counties where there's enough of a manufacturing presence and enough construction going on that you had those kind of old-fashioned, classically blue-collar workers. Those are the folks we chose to study. And again, you can categorize it multiple ways. A lot of folks tend to use the categories of college graduate versus non-college. And non-college, again, is a huge swath. I mean, that's 2/3 of the voters, right? One other quick point. When media pundits talk about working class, they don't know what they're talking about because none of them are working class. They live in big cities. They make hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they tend to think of working class being white working class. Well, there's the black people, and there's the Hispanic people, and then there's the white working class, right? Mm-hmm. Which is just complete bullshit. Sorry, I keep using that word, but it comes.
You're welcome to use it.
Because a lot of working class people are people of color.
I just want to piggyback what Mike said and just say when the media talks about them, they'll say the working class and they literally just mean white people, rural white people. There's sort of this other thing, which is they lump people of color together and think that Latinx voters function the same as black voters, and sort of without even getting into the complexity of black voters who make up 12% of America. When you mash these people together, you're actually then imprecise in trying to talk to voters, understand voters. And what ends up happening a lot on political campaigns who mirror the media is it just falls into some really lazy stereotyping and beliefs that people have about what is of concern to these groups of people. And it's reflected back that when you ask people, like, are politicians listening to me? And they'll say no. And the answer is because you're literally not polling them to listen to them. And then when you do, you're reflecting back the sort of elitist, like New York and DC centered lifestyles that don't intersect with any of these people.
Not much has changed in the ways the media or campaigns are talking about working class voters. Do you think this group of voters is as influential as people say they are? Do their votes actually determine election outcomes to the degree people say they do?
I think of elections as math problems. So every group matters, because the problem with the way the media talks about elections is they make it sound like one thing is the thing. But that's not how elections work. Elections are math problems. You got to get to 51%, right? So how do you get there? You add people together to get to your number. There is not a magic group of people that get you to, we don't live in that monolith of a country. Thank God. We live in a really interesting country, a multiracial democracy.
Mike, you refer to the working class voters as 2/3 of the electorate. That's an opportunity to capture a significant number of voters. Was there a time where this working class voter had more influence? Has that changed?
There has never been a time when working class voters have not been important because it's such a large and diverse group of folks. However, I would say I got started in community and labor organizing in the 1980s in Iowa, well, actually in Nebraska, which is my home state, but then in Iowa. And I ended up going down to Little Rock in 92 after the primary was over. Clinton went with some pollsters, I think in part because he was being influenced by a lot of wealthy donors. And he went with some pollsters who were very ideologically focused on more upper income issues. And they came up with these categories. Suburban moms, office park dads were two of the most famous ones, that were basically saying the only people that matter are upper middle class suburbanites. All those black folks, yeah, we should turn them out, but they aren't that important. And God forbid that we have to go deal with those rustics, outside of the big cities. There was a real attitude in the Democratic Party, which I remember very well. I fought against it. Sometimes I won, a lot of times I lost in those years. But there was a real attitude that the important voters are these upper income folks in the suburbs. That was also where all the money came from. It was all about who had the money.
So the problem is that if you're talking about how do we think about folks election to election, they don't have the same concerns. I mean, just gender-wise, women experience working classness, at least in the way they tell pollsters, just absolutely a different worldview.
Well, and you see that in the gender gap, which is the biggest this year that it has ever been. There's a lot of men who really love Trump's macho craziness, and women are like, no way, this guy is an asshole. And in fact, we're finding that it's better not to have Trump's voice in an ad, even a negative ad about Trump, because women are so over Trump that they don't want to listen to anything he has to say. So they just turn off the ad or switch channels if they hear his voice.
Because effectively they'll miss the message the Democrat wants them to hear. Like, you don't want this guy, you want to vote for me, but that's going to backfire if you use his voice.
Yeah.
So this makes me think about the best strategy. And Mike, you wrote about some of this. What do you think the best strategy is for reaching, organizing, or mobilizing working class voters?
There's two things that I would highlight as sort of top two most important things. One is that we have to find a way to reach them. These are very cynical voters because they've really been screwed over in their lives. And so they're cynical about everything, but they are really cynical about the media. And they refer to, media companies as the corporate media. They don't trust anything they're hearing. And in a lot of cases, their local newspapers have shut down. Their local radio stations have been bought up, and they just do a nationwide broadcast. Their local TV stations are Sinclair News, and the discerning folks know that that's completely biased. We have to find ways that they can get information that they can trust. That's going to come through people that they know and trust, from institutions that they believe in, like labor unions. They believe in local small business. But we have to find people and institutions that they will trust, and we have to build out in a community organizing kind of manner. And in terms of the message itself, we need a strongly populist message focused on economic issues. These voters can sometimes get distracted by right-wing race-mongering stuff or by anti-trans stuff. But bottom line is, they are in enough economic pain, and have been for a long time, that if you focus on economic issues, that's where you get their attention, and that's where you can keep their attention. In our polling, that overcomes the culture war stuff and the immigration stuff and all of the racist garbage.
A lot of these voters were saying to me, I'm Googling healthcare for and against, single payer for and against, tax cuts for and against, because I don't trust the media. I'm looking for things that feel like they're going to give me both sides. So simple things like getting out of messaging from us and getting into things that feel to them trustworthy. And so we need organizers and people to focus on them in conversations that feel right to them. But also the way we talk about politics on the left writ large is just absolutely wrong. When we said things like more money for education, it literally means nothing. And so what we really started to change is like more money for your kid's classroom. A lot of schools are making people have to pay for after school activities that used to be free, like football and basketball. That should be free. We couldn't say more money for healthcare. We said prescription drug costs because people understood that. The other thing is that we tend to just go to the solution right away and not bring people on the emotional journey it takes to get where we want them to go. Every one of us eventually makes an emotional decision based on the information we have. It feels right, giving people the emotional reason behind issues, policies, solutions, and make them feel seen through that.
Well, that's really interesting because what's happening on the Republican side of things, you've both laid out strategies over a long period of time for getting people on board with a progressive policy agenda and voting for Democrats. But I see them fast tracking a lot of voters to their agenda because Trump is direct and straightforward. Things seem more complicated on our side. Can we have one politician who's actually speaking really clearly and simply about this is what I'm going to do for you, and I'm going to do it?
I don't think Trump's appeal is that he says he's going to do things and people believe he's going to do it. I think he's appealing to people's emotional state in a way that they feel, I always tell people that Obama and Trump have the same message. Things are really effed up and we need somebody totally different to run things. The difference is that Trump does it with a lot of racism. But it's the same sort of core understanding that Americans are really frustrated with the fact that every system in their life is broken and doesn't work for them or see them as human beings. And so I think that the problem is that Trump speaks to their emotional anger and gives them somebody to blame for it, which is immigrants. And Democrats tell people that they'll promise them things, but it doesn't get backed up with the reality because they don't actually then pass those things. So it's sort of like people don't believe you're going to do it, but also you're not seeing them the way they want to be seen, which is emotionally. Like, I can't get the healthcare I need, and I'm worried about it. The school that my kid's going to, things are costing more and more money. The teachers are more and more upset. People are in an emotional state, and we're like, I have a policy for you.
Yeah.
The way I always thought about it was, a lot of folks voted for Trump, for a simple reason. They wanted to flip the bird to the establishment. Donald Trump was the perfect candidate to say that, even though he was rich and all that, but he was like the anti-establishment.
I think we could probably go on and on. You have so much experience and perspective on this. I really appreciate you. Jordan, is there anything you want to share about how race and class are intersecting in politics more broadly that we didn't get to?
I've always thought, as imperfect as that is, and it comes with a lot of horrors for Indigenous folks who were here, the thing that America is getting right is we are struggling to create the multiracial democracy that we envision, but have yet to live up to. And I always think of my grandfather, who told me that America is not the story of racists and people in power. America's our story of persevering, of building it up for free, of being imprisoned here, and then fighting for our freedom, and then fighting to make it the democracy that we ourselves believe it could and should be for us, for Black folks, for other folks, for working class folks. And so what's important for this conversation is that most people hold those dualities inside themselves. As Americans, we hold those dualities sort of being here, sort of the horrors and also the aspirations. And people who get it right speak to the aspirations. They speak to what we could be. And so when it comes to working class folks, what I always think about is ultimately we need to figure out how to communicate an aspirational story that sees them as full participants in it, as fully equal as everyone else, and not sort of to be dictated to by elites, but rather full participants in their democracy, that they themselves can live easier, better lives. And so one of the things I think that we need to do is have that conversation with voters. People will use race and fear of immigrants to divide us and to distract you with all of these things that are nonsense, that aren't important.
So, Mike, is there anything you want to share that we didn't get to?
Well, the number one thing I would want to say is that Jordan is a really smart guy. I think race and class we've been struggling with it for as long as this country, has been around before we even became a country. We're going to keep struggling with it. It's an ongoing dynamic. Sometimes we get it right. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy knew how to get it right. I think Kamala Harris has the potential to get it right, but it ain't easy. It will never be easy. And whatever happens, there'll be a backlash to it. It's the ongoing American struggle.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again, Jordan Berg Powers, consultant on organizing and messaging in politics, as well as a current doctoral student at the Brandeis Heller School for Social Policy, and Mike Lux, political strategist at Mike Lux Media. Jordan and Mike talked about one way to identify working class voters, whether or not someone has a college degree. It's a common approach for categorizing thousands of people for polls. And if we take not having a college degree as a measurement, 2/3 of voters are working class. If we think about people with college degrees who must also work day in and day out to get by, like Orlando described, the number is even bigger. But there is another big distinction that causes a lack of unity among working class voters, which gets to something interesting about geography that Orlando and I also talked about. There's talk about coastal elites and urban voters versus rural voters. That's part of this rural-urban divide. What do you think about this?
It's funny you bring that up because I often hear that and I think, are they talking about me? Like, I'm certainly by no means elite. I don't consider myself that way. But at the same time, if I were to sit down with someone living in, somewhere in Iowa or Idaho or wherever, I imagine there'd be a really just tremendous difference between our lives. And, they might lump me in that category. I don't know. But then it comes down to, so what do we consider elite as? Like, what are we defining that as? Is that just a lifestyle or is it strictly economic? Ultimately, I think it's just another way to pit people against each other. It really just creates this divide. And then suddenly it's like us against them or them against us or whatever.
So we're going to talk with someone next week who's got more to say about the rural-urban divide and misconceptions about rural voters.
And then this idea of voting against your interests, it doesn't take into account that people have many interests. And so maybe you're voting for a leader who isn't representing your economic interest, but they are representing a cultural interest. And your interest is actually having a representative who reflects your community and your culture.
That's next week on Shifting Terrain. If you like what you've heard and want to talk about it with someone you know, please share this episode. Shifting Terrain was executive produced by Amanda Cowper and myself, Rachel Rybacek, production consulting and audio mixing by Karen Given, additional help from CJ Hayes, music by Blue Dot Sessions. Thank you to our guests, Jordan Berg Powers, Mike Lux, and Orlando. And a special thank you to Alastair Sherman, Ali Oshinsky, and eMedia. See you next week.